How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another essential and interesting After Effects tutorial. Now, in this tutorial, we'll be talking about keyframe interpolation. All right, until we get there, the most important thing is to create a composition. And then I'm going to create, let's say, a solid that has a background, just like a bit darker gray. And I'm just going to lock it now so that my background is locked to not inadvertently select it. Okay, now that I've done this, I'm gonna select a shape here, and I'm gonna take the ellipse tool, and by holding shift, I'm gonna draw a perfect circle here, right? You hold shift and left click and drag, and you create a circle, right? I'm gonna leave it of this color. I think it's nice and contrasty with the background. Now, the most important thing is talking about keyframe interpolation. Now, what is keyframe interpolation? Now, let's say now, for example, that you wanted to move. First of all, before I start moving this, I'd like to put the anchor point here at the center. I selected the anchor pan behind tool here, the anchor point in the center. So when I move or rotate, it will be where it's supposed to be. Okay, now, when we're creating keyframes here, let's say if I click P on my keyboard and I select the stopwatch at the marker here, 5 seconds, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to the right? And After Effects is going to create a couple of things for you visually to show you what's going on. Now, this is showcasing that this is your initial keyframe. And then here, it's difficult to see if I need to move it out a little bit in time here. This is your last keyframe, right? So it's visually showing you where your first and where your last keyframes are. It's exactly this and this, right? But what After Effects shows you also here is a bunch of dots. If you can see here, I'm going to zoom in a bit more. You can see each of these dots here are representing what? Where they're representing actually what's going on between here and here. So those are keyframes that are non-existing, but actually the computer is filling in, and we call these in-betweens. So keyframes that are in between the two major keyframes that we've made. Okay, now to illustrate this further, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change by holding Control left click on my keyboard here. I'm going to change the view here in the timeline to be in frames. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this keyframe here on the marker, let's say 24. Okay, so I'm just going to come in here and say, okay, at frame 24, I'm going to move in my keyframe here. And so what you can see now visually is happening is that you will be able to count if you want to, but you can trust me on this one. You will have from here to here 24 keyframes, right? Now, the most important thing to understand here is that in terms of the interpolation, what it means. Well, officially it means how your shape is moving from one point to another. That's how I can basically explain this. But the idea here is that you would have to understand the key principles of animation from which let's say all of this stems from or comes from. Yeah. And the idea here is simple. You have something that's called timing and something that's called spacing, right? So let's assume that going from here to here is what we call timing. So it will take me 24 frames to get from here to here, right? So this is the idea of timing. But now regarding the spacing, it's completely different, right? The spacing is how I get from here to here, right? So now my spacing is very simple. I'm getting from here to here in a very linear way, right? But what happens here is, and this is a little bit difficult to see, is that you will have a keyframe here that's actually represented like a circle in blue. And this is a handle, right, that you can move around, right? You have the same handle here on your last keyframe. It is now here. And you will have only those handles on the keyframes you've created. okay? Not in the in-betweens. Now watch what happens. I still have the same timing. I'm going from 0 to 24 frames, but my spacing is completely different, right? You can see that now it's more moving into a shape that's more kind of like an arc here, okay? So this is the idea for the difference between timing and spacing. This is to visually illustrate to you guys what happens. So I'm just going to quickly undo here and go back to the linear positioning here to show you something else that's also pretty important. Now your keyframes here look like a diamond shape, and they're in by default. If you left click on your, if you right click on your mouse here, you will have something that's called Keyframe Assistant, right? And you will have a couple of options here, which you can use also by pressing F9 on the keyboard, or Shift F9 or Control Shift F9, right? So the idea of the easy is to change the keyframe function to be more like something that we call a Bezier curve. And that Bezier curve is exactly the curve I kind of like tried to illustrate before, very similar to that. So if we say, for example, I want to move slowly out of this position because nothing moves super fast when it starts, okay? So we ease in slowly, we have a bit more keyframes at the beginning, and then we go fast, and then we slow in into the final keyframe. So how I would approach this, I would right click on the mouse, and then I would say here easy in or easy out. Now there's always a confusion about this, but easy out means that I'm slowly going out of an animation, and then this one here should be easy in. Okay, so when we play this back, you can, I'm just going to reduce the time of my comp here to be up until here, and go under composition settings and set it to be the duration, let's say on 25 frames. Okay, so this is more manageable to see. So now if I click on my spacebar, what you can see is actually, this is something that's more felt rather than seen. You can see that it's slowly starting and slowly easing into the motion here, right? So if I select again the shape, what you will see here, and it's very subtle, is you will see keyframes now, the actual in-betweens, they're actually spaced a little bit differently. These two are closer, and then there's a bit more space here, and then there's some uniform space here when it gains speed. And then same thing here towards the end, it's like slowly, you know, the keyframes are becoming closer, and then it's like slowly stopping in and coming into this keyframe, right? So this is what we would call also a Bezier curve, or something that's like more, you know, if I were to click on the graph editor, and this is part of the next lesson, but you can see how we're moving from one keyframe to the other, right? And this is the keyframe interpolation. It's very crucial to understand this, because this actually defines how shapes things move in After Effects so that they're believable and make more sense and move in a more organic way. So I strongly recommend that you check out our course regarding the 12 principles of animation, because it will help you and get you ahead in understanding how things move and why we have these 12 principles of animation. All right. So this concludes this lesson, and I will see you in the next one.